podcast by Bonsai Creative that helps creatives in film get where they're going faster by sharing the advice, knowledge, and insights of professional creatives across the film industry. I'm your host, Chris Barkley.
Well, hello, everybody. My name's Todd Looby. I'm the Executive Director of Bend Film, the organization that runs a festival and a 30-seat micro cinema here in beautiful Bend, Oregon, Central Oregon. And what you might know me for is, I've been at this job for about 8 years, building this festival up to now an Academy qualifying festival, one of the 25 coolest festivals in the world. It's been a lot of fun doing that, and now running a daily cinema, which is a lifelong dream of mine. And before that, I was a filmmaker, making a lot of narrative and documentary features, and running the fest circuit. And now I'm enjoying this. And what we're working on is building the festival up even more. Getting prepared for our 20th anniversary or 2023 and seeing what else we could do with this thing and what we can do with film to make sure that better films are being made by more people. So that's kind of the long-term goal.
Todd Looby, welcome to the Make It podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here.
Anytime, and congratulations on being an Academy Award film festival, qualifying film festival. That's a huge deal. You mentioned a little bit about your past before becoming the executive director of the Bend Film Festival. So I want to give this audience a little deeper sense of what you've been working on. I'm going to read from a bio. As I always say, this is the internet. So if anything sounds incorrect, feel free to amend to that and make me repent for my sins. Todd has led the Bend Film Organization since 2014. In that time, the organization's budget tripled. It has acquired a daily operating cinema, the Tin Pan Theater, and was named top 25 coolest festivals in the world in 2019. Todd began his professional career as a business manager for Chicago's largest general construction firm. While working in the construction business, he taught himself filmmaking and eventually made the leap to full-time filmmaking in 2008. Todd's second narrative feature, Lefty, screened at festivals across the country and was named in the top 10 movies of 2009 by the Chicago Tribune's Metro Mix. His follow-up, Son of None, a narrative short shot in Liberia, won the Special Jury Award at Slamdance 2011 and won Best Short at the Boston Film Festival. Todd's last narrative feature, Be Good, stars established filmmakers and actors Amy Siemens and Joe Swanberg and was called Well Acted, Crafted, and Observed by Variety. Prior to Bend Film, Todd was the executive director of Franciscan Works, an organization that currently supports a boarding school and 15-acre farm in Liberia, West Africa. That's pretty amazing. And one of the things that jumped out to me right away was that this thing is happening in Bend, Oregon. So B-E-N-D, Oregon. Mm-hmm. Now, I have had the pleasure of spending some time in Bend, Oregon. And it is, I would love to. It is one of the secret treasures of this country. So for these listeners that don't know why a film festival in Bend, Oregon would be named top 25 coolest festivals in the country, tell us about and describe Bend, Oregon for folks.
It can be described several ways. Let's say there's a few different things going on here, which I find really fascinating. So let's say when I was in Chicago, hearing about Bend, all I know is that as a city kid is that there's mountains, there's skiing, there's mountain biking. and it's beautiful country. That's kind of all I knew, never having been here. And that's kind of the reputation that I think it has, say, out east. The most interesting thing about, this town, I think, is that it's big. There's relatively, there's about 100,000 people that live, in and around Bend. So yes, you do have that, you do have a mountain that's 25 minutes away. You do have, 3,000 miles of bike trails out there, that stuff. But what you also have is a city. You have a town of 100,000 people, and people that are, for the most part, moving here because, it's a destination. Like, this is some place that people want to relocate to and engage in. And, what you find is that, like, a lot of people come out, for maybe a smaller town experience and for that proximity to the outdoors and, all the beautiful natural things that happen. And then what you see is that, a lot of people come from cities, and they do miss the big cultural scenes that happen in cities, right? So what you find here is a kind of a perfect mix of culture and escape, let's say, escape to the outdoors. So it is, it is beautiful. Like, if you're up high out east looking west, you see, you could see these 7 beautiful snow-capped peaks and just miles of trees, of fir trees. But as you get into the downtown and the city and, new neighborhoods that are popping up in more industrial districts, then you get into kind of the crazy culture that's going on. And I think that's what's really unique about this place as far as mountain towns go. And, and it is sort of just, it's a whiteboard that anything can happen, like everyone's moving here and everyone has, ideas of things to do, things that aren't here being met, and, trying their own thing. So, and that happens creatively and, community organizations, things like that. It's been really cool to engage in and see what people are coming up with. So, since this is like the Make It podcast, like I feel that there is this entrepreneurial spirit that, that's really alive here. People just kind of coming out here and figuring it out.
Yeah, I felt that for sure. I went there and experienced incredible beer.
Yeah.
Incredible food.
I didn't even mention the beer with all that. Yeah. I mean, that's, like after 8 years, like that's a huge selling point early on, but you're like, I mean, it's pretty wild, that beer scene, and like with all other stuff going on, like I'm saying, I forgot about that. And that's actually kind of a big deal because it's awesome.
It is. I was up there with my friend Carissa, and the outdoors thing is real. We actually got inspired to run 5 miles together in the freezing cold just because we saw the trails. We're like, how are we going to see the city? We're like, the best way to see the city is just to take a run. Like the trails go straight through. And so I would encourage anyone to go and make sure you go and visit this film festival as well. And we're going to talk more about that. It happens October 6th through the 9th in person, and October 10th through the 23rd virtually. We'll talk more about that and plug that some more as we go. I'm curious how you taught yourself filmmaking. Was there a moment in your childhood coming up where you realized you wanted a life in film?
Yeah, it's interesting. The only thing, so I grew up on the far south side of Chicago. So I was in the city, and, it was like a kind of an Irish neighborhood with, there's a lot of like cops and firemen and stuff like that. And there's a little blue collar neighborhood. And, so everyone, there were no artists like in the neighborhood. There was, art wasn't a thing. So, film film wasn't a thing. People saw movies, right? But film, no one, I hadn't heard the word film till I was like 17 or something, So, like there's no, example of someone, oh, he's a filmmaker, I want to do what that guy does. It's like, oh, I want to be a cop, a fireman, or a lawyer, or, maybe that guy's an engineer. That's kind of where I was going. And that was like what you did. So, but there was this one dude who lived on our block, and he was known as kind of a, I don't know, just an interesting guy. And everyone heard that he was making a movie at one point, like he was a few years older than us. And, so he was in the barbershop down the street and making a movie. And like, that was the first thing that, probably in my head at, whatever, 12, 13, knew that people did this thing, made movies. Right. So never really thought about it again until I went to college, and I went to the University of Illinois down in Champaign. And there was like an intro. I was in, an engineering major, but there was an intro to, there was an English 103 class, it was called, but it was like an intro to film. So it was mostly just like film story, film theory or whatever, but it was awesome because you would watch a movie a week and then talk about it. So a lot of Hitchcock and, it's like Daughters of the Dust and Meshes in the Afternoon. And, but the biggest thing was like the end movie was Apocalypse Now, which they showed on these big, huge, the old laser discs. And that was a big thing, like, ooh, look at this new technology, But it was cool. Like, you just sit in the library and like, I had seen Apocalypse Now before, and they had a cool, really cool screening room. And I was blown away. And then, so after that class, then I did, sort of start looking more into film and seeing it as like something that, hey, this might be interesting, because, engineering at the time wasn't totally cutting it. I don't think I was necessarily prepared to, by my high school, to like excel in engineering, just because our like computer program was just so, ancient.
Right.
And it was so robust then in school. So you're like, whoa. So anyway, so I got really interested, but, I still kept with sort of engineering, and I went to, on to get a master's degree in environmental engineering. And, but I always had this thing in the back of my head, and in fact, like when I was graduating from undergrad, I got a part in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Nice.
And the experience was awesome. Like it was really, eye-opening, and, it furthered my interest in the arts, never having experience, never done a high school play or anything like that. And, as I got out of grad school, actually, it was my last semester of grad school where I was actually in this play. So I was sort of deferring that film thing for like 4 to 6 years. And
was there a fear there? Is that why you were deferring it? Like to tell your family and that, hey, I really am interested. I caught the bug.
Yeah, I think that was a big part, like again, coming from that blue collar background, no one knowing any artists that like have made it. It's like, well, you got, why you got this engineering degree. Why would you ever do anything different? Why would you not like make good money? Because, parents saying like, well, we didn't really have these opportunities. So, don't flush down the toilet.
Right.
So, that's sort of the mentality, and it's, it makes sense, right? Like, yeah, it wasn't super easy growing up, with, nothing was hard necessarily, but, it's like there was always times, I think, where, during my upbringing where my parents were worried, they worked really hard to put us through Catholic school and stuff, because the public schools weren't really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times there were, real tentative moments. And I could see, so I understand that mentality. And
it's almost like you had to come out as an artist.
But that's exactly totally what it was. And, to everyone's credit in my family is like, when I was in that play, like they did make the road trip down to Champaign to see the play. And we're pretty like, whoa, okay. Dang. I thought you were, we always knew you were weird, but we actually see something. However, do it on the side. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So then I moved to Chicago after graduating and got involved in Improv Olympic. So I had a buddy, in fact, my buddy who moved to Nashville, he was always doing stand up and or Second City in Chicago. And he said, well, come and do this Improv Olympic with me. And Improv Olympic is now called IO, but it was essentially the hub of improv in Chicago and frankly the country. When you have like Sharna Halpern and Del Close, just legends in the improv world, that launched, Jason Sudeikis
So did they do kids? Did they do Kids in the Hall as well?
No, Kids in the Hall was they were Canadian, but I think Kids in the Hall did come from like say Second City, Toronto.
Absolutely.
Perhaps,
I thought they came from one of the popular improv houses.
Yeah. So one of those kind of offshoots, and there's even like say Will Ferrell kind of comes from some offshoot of Improv Olympic, and I forget that so they went out LA, like Improv Olympic, some guys, and went out to LA and started whatever the troupe that Farrell was a part of. And then in New York, I think it was called like Upright Citizens Brigade.
Yeah.
Maybe like Amy Poehler or something that came from there. And, anyway, so it all started in Chicago and so this was a great hub. So like I would go there because students could see free shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived on the north side of Chicago at that point. And I would just go and just sit in the theater and watch these people and was just blown away. Like like that was in the early 2000s. So you do see people like, Jack McBrayer, who, I haven't really watched 30 Rock. I apologize. But, the show was founded by, so I know for some reason, I'm embarrassed, but, her name's totally escaping me. It's still early in the morning. I'm only 3/4. Tina Fey, my God. Thank you. That might happen a couple times in this interview. So if you get my back on those things,
I've got your back, brother. I got your back.
Thank you. I got 3/4 of a cup through coffee and I need more. But anyway, yeah. So Tina Fey and then Jack McBrayer, who's like the page guy in 30 Rock, so I watch him and like guys like Dan Beckendahl and mostly like the cast of Veep.
Mm-hmm.
Were all these people that I would sit there and watch and just blown away by it. And while I was doing that, so I had this good buddy and he was working at, let's just say, an internship in Portland. And for this internship, they would get all this overstock stuff and give it away to the people they were working with. And he goes, at one point, he meets up with me and, we're back in Chicago and he says, hey, I don't know what to do with this camera, but they gave this camera as part of the internship. I know, you're really into film, so check it out. And it was a really early model mini DV camera. So probably from like 97, the model was. And I remember he handed it to me and then I spent all night like reading the manual and like getting really excited about what these things could do. So that just kind of started. So then, and what was really cool about it, and I hadn't really seen models like this after, but this particular model, and it might have been some kind of prototype, and that's why it got to this overstock thing, was literally like that big. So this is in the late 90s and literally could fit in my jeans pocket. So I brought that thing everywhere in my early 20s. So as we bounced around Chicago, I would just film everything. And, someday I'm going to revisit. I mean, that stuff's like 20 years old now. So it'll be really cool to go back over that stuff at some point. But so I would just film stuff, and then I would, I didn't splurge yet on a computer, but I would literally line up 2 VCRs and run the mini DV through one VCR, and re-record. What was that on a VHS tape? And then I would take that VHS tape, was kind of the rough cut. So I'd, record and pause, and at the right moment playing it on the mini DV, hit, record, and then that would be my first track. And then I'd loop it through again and through it, and then I found this little mixer at some garage sale, and I would then mix in music or do VO or something. And, did that for a couple of years, just kind of learning it. And then I finally got an iMac in like 01 or 2 or whatever, when I had when I was working in construction management and finally had some money. And then I would just, I'd work all day and then spend all night doing improv and or editing, that stuff. So just teaching myself how to do it until, so I did that for about 7 years until the construction company I worked for said, "Hey, you're into film. We want to film the project." They were building a new air traffic control tower at O'Hare.
Yeah.
And they said, "Why don't you film that?" So they paid me like a lot of money. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And then I had a boss who said, "Yeah, you can't do both." And I said, "Okay, I'll do film." And, they bridged that time where, I needed some money. So at that point, going back to the fact that, you should make a living doing something like this, like I had that security. So at that point, then I was like, okay, this isn't a huge risk, since I am going to make money with film. So I'll go film and quit that job that I didn't, like. Learned a lot from, but didn't like.
Right. And I've always thought that people who have an engineering mind have what it takes to be above average or great at music or film. It's like the same muscle.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And then vice versa. If you find yourself being really good at film or cinematography or playing piano or guitar or something like that, there's probably a pretty good chance you'd be a good engineer as well, because you're a problem solver. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, I mean, that's, I think, what it boils down to. And it's really interesting you say that, because a lot of people, who are brought up as artists and then get into, say, some sort of business, or you need some sort of routine to create or whatever. And you do find that they do, adapt all of these organizational things that, engineers start with. So it's really fascinating. It's kind of the same brain space, though, in like, common, let's say, perception is that that's two totally different things. Right? I find they're very, they're very closely related.
I find the same thing. They're very, very similar. So you got this job shooting a film for O'Hare Air Traffic Control, which is
so cool.
It's kind of like you put your intention out in the world, and then someone noticed it, and then it even came. The universe came and found you and said, "Okay, shoot this film," even though it's not the film you wanted to shoot. Then you made that transition out of that construction job into filmmaking. How many sleepless nights did you have trying to make that transition? And how did you explain that to everyone in your life, that you were going to leave this construction job that had been lucrative for you?
Right. Yeah. When you say that too, I can't discount privilege at all. I talk about this blue collar thing and whatnot, but the interesting thing about where I grew up is it was a very well connected neighborhood. Like I went to high school with, Mayor Daley's son. He was my age. So in this high school is, relatively well known one on the south side called Mount Carmel. So, like Donovan McNabb was a year behind me. Simeon Rice was a year ahead of me. So it's relatively well known, but it's a blue collar school, but it's really well connected. So, yes, I like made these decisions and I took these risks, but I had the privilege of those connections where, I'm in a right environment to hopefully someone pick up on that, what you're saying, putting yourself out in the universe. I knew enough people with enough resources or influence or whatever that, I wasn't totally, just throwing it all out there. So, like that's important to say, because I know, there's so many artists here that really like, there's no plan B, like these are people I've always admired that really rolled the dice, really took a risk, really, went in all or nothing.
Right.
And, it's a different life experience for sure. And, that's why, artists that do that and succeed, deserve all the credit, and those that don't deserve, any, what I want to say, like
discredit,
derision, because yeah, exactly. Because perhaps they didn't have those, the resources or the luck that other people had. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, that the only like lesson in that is, if you do feel it and you do want to, you do have to give it a shot at some point, so kind of back to your credit is like, you do have to throw it out into the universe and see what happens.
Yeah. You owe it to yourself.
To have a plan B with it. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like I always equate it to a tightrope walker, right? So
yeah,
there's a different focus and a different level of interest in a tightrope walker that doesn't have a safety net below him or her.
Yeah.
If you go to a circus, you'll see a tightrope walker, and then below there'll be a big giant safety net. And it's fascinating that they can do it, but that nobody's going to die. And that's really great. It's actually pretty comforting. It's like, oh God, they're not going to die. It's good. They make a mistake. And then you see these crazy guys that will tightrope between skyscrapers. And if they fall, it's over. And
exactly.
That brings in millions and millions and millions. That scales. That brings in millions of people because we just can't believe it because we would never do it. I was talking to one of the people that works with us named Elise the other day, and I was telling her that when someone bets you, like challenges you to a bet, what they're saying is I would never do that. Therefore, I'll bet you $50 you won't do it. Because I would never do it. So therefore, I think it's a safe bet that you would. And I said, anytime someone does that, pop up, do the thing they're afraid of, and take your money and walk away. Because to be in this business is to be a bit fearless. And they can't believe how fearless you can actually be. You went into filmmaking full time. You took that leap.
Yeah.
Maybe you had a small safety net, but I love the way you did it. And you went in and shot a feature right away. What was your experience shooting Lefty, wearing so many hats? I assume you wore at least 5 hats shooting this.
Well, I don't talk about it much, but what preceded Lefty was this movie, The Sight, that I tried to make. And I would, like while I was doing the construction and teaching myself filmmaking, going back to the engineering question is, this movie Primer came out in 2004, and that's by Shane Carruth. And, though we won't hear anything more from Shane, I think for a long time, rightfully so, he was a big inspiration in that his experience seemed pretty similar. Like, I think he actually had this engineering background, and this was a big hit at Sundance. Primer. So, he had this engineering background, but the story of the movie is like he had $7,000 and he had a 16 millimeter camera and he had some buddies and he made this movie. So he sort of, we came from the same brain space, at least, it was something I could really identify with as far as creatively, in that he said, this is what I got. I got $7,000. I got this camera. I got these friends. How am I going to make a movie? And then everything kind of backs into that. He backs into the story and how it's going to be, you know, and it's a sci-fi movie. You know, when you hear sci-fi, you think big budgets in that, but
yep.
you know, he did this thing for whatever, $7,000 on film, no less. And, you know, like the story is that he, you know, like the tales at the end of filming, like he literally had, you know, things that didn't make it in the cut were like, you know, like 100 frames of film, something crazy. Like he had it so planned out that he was able to do it. And then it like won Sundance. And then, you know, it's one of the bigger stories of, you know, indie filmmaking that happened in the 21st century. So with that, you know, so I did the same thing, you know, like, so I was at this construction job. I'm like, well, what's really interesting? I'm like, I've never seen, you know, a movie about what happens on a construction site. And especially because, you know, at that point I was working on the south side of Chicago, building mixed income housing. And it's just actually, you know, I was at the University of Chicago at that point, and it was fascinating. So that was in Hyde Park, which is this, you know, oasis around, you know, I went to high school really close to Hyde Park and Mount Carmel, but you know, there's neighborhoods around there where there's high unemployment. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, you know, this construction job, and there's a lot of construction going on at U of C because they have this huge endowment. And all of a sudden, all these people are coming in from God knows where, and they're working. And then people in the neighborhood are going, well, what's up? You know, we live right here. There's obviously jobs here, you know, like why can't we get jobs? So it was a really fascinating dynamic of how like everything, you know, just kind of is how cities work in all these different and sometimes opposing interests come into play there on this like square block construction site, you know, and like the whole idea was, you know, that it was sort of like a movie in that you have an architect who essentially writes a script, and we were a general contractor, and we were sort of the director of the project. And then you have your producers who are the people that own, you know, like UFC, and the people that they hired, you know, are the producers or the EPs of this film. And you have all these construction workers who are the actors putting this building together, you know, in the building, obviously being the film at the end. And, you know, in all these different dynamics, these artistic and these commercial and these socioeconomic and these racial and all this stuff was happening on this one block. And everyone's under, you know, it's a pressure cooker because, you know, you're always behind schedule, you're always under budget and all this stuff. And so, you know, I just came up with this idea of, you know, how to, you know, like that this has never been done before, and how to do this without any money. So my thing was like, I'm going to make this feature for $5,000 on digital, and shoot it and set it in a construction trailer. You know, so all these forces over the course of one day converge on this construction trailer on this, you know, person. So, though I love, you know, like I think the story's awesome and the idea is awesome. Like I had no idea what the hell I was doing as a filmmaker, and it shows. But you know, like I like, okay, I did it. I made this thing for $5,000, and you know, like, and I wound up like editing it for a year until I was like, yeah, you know, this isn't very good. But like, so that whole process, so teaching myself like how to shoot something and how to, you know, I was already editing and I edited a lot of stuff, so I knew how to edit, but like crafting a story and, you know, like, yeah, this thing should have been 90 minutes. And then, you know, my edit was like, this is 70 because those 20 minutes are garbage. You know, so like how to craft a story in the editing room. So all that stuff was like that self-taught, that self-teaching, like I was saying. And then, kind of had the same, so that was in like one fest, and I realized, you know, why it was only in one festival, this one that started up, but it was like that one fest. And this is something that I always remember, you know, to this day, and why I think I gravitated to the festival world is that, you know, that one fest kept me going. You know, I don't think I would have still pursued this if I had spent, you know, probably at that time the 5,000 ekes up to like 7 or 8 when you do fest submissions and all this other stuff, maybe buying new computers or whatever. So, $5 to $7 grand, 2 years of time essentially, and then nothing comes of it,
Right.
Tons of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But nothing comes of it. Like at that point, it's like, okay, well, you gave it a shot, go back to a regular job. But that one fest is like, oh, okay, well, someone liked it. All right, maybe I'll keep going,
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And so like that, I've always carried that with me because, like my admiration for the one festival director that led me in, this guy, Richard Shino in Mason, Iowa, who ran like the Iowa Independent Film Fest. And I'll never forget that because, and that's sort of the opportunities that I look for here in this job at Ben Film, knowing that, that's our job here is to
I find
give people that inspiration to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it fascinating that so many people, and please take this the right way, that the place where dreams live and die is, on the precipice of acceptance.
Yeah. Right.
It's like this idea that I wouldn't be talking to you today if a festival director in Iowa didn't accept your film blows my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. That one thing, and it is. It's like, and that's another thing I was talking about, like these artists that like I didn't put 10,000 hours into the making of this movie or to my film career, or whatever.
Right.
But there's so many people that do 10, 20, whatever, and that's just nuts to me to spend that much time. So we're talking, probably 10,000 hours, 2 or 3 films that don't do anything and they're still going. I'm like, I love that tenacity of a lot of artists, because you do like there's no way. There are people that do it. I love it. We made a program out of it, First Features, but like just how to carry yourself on a set if you've never done it before, like just that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not only like knowing your voice and how to put your voice out there, which is a huge thing, and it's a process that might take time, but then how do you run everything? So like to do it on your first time is so hard, and it's also so expensive to do it for a first time. So to survive to do it again when nothing comes of it, when that acceptance hasn't come, it's really admirable.
Yeah, it's about having something to say. And there's a movie, Coda. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but
no, man, I can't say I want to see Coda so bad.
It's got nominated for a few Academy Awards. It's really great. I was an emotional wreck at the end, full disclosure.
Yeah,
but
I know.
But there's a great line in it where the music teacher in the film, I can't remember the actor's name that played that part, but he was wonderful. He says, there's a lot of pretty voices that don't have anything to say. And he mentions that David Bowie described Bob Dylan's voice as sand and glue. But the difference was Bob Dylan had something to say. It didn't matter that his voice sounded like sand and glue. So if you're a filmmaker, have something to say. Speaking of which, I want to dig into Bend film a little bit. I mentioned earlier that this is going to take place this year, October 6th through 9th in person. So a 3-day in-person festival followed by a 13-day virtual festival. So what is your strategy? That's really unique. What is your strategy there?
Yeah. A lot of festivals are doing some version of a hybrid or bigger, or just going virtual or just going in person. And what I found here is that in person, as far as a festival, is just, is the way to go. I mean, it's a totally different and all encompassing experience, Mm-hmm. I mean, I love going to film fests. And we have so many fans that just love going to fest. I mean, there's nothing like being in a theater, seeing something for the first time. That's amazing. And, often independent films are really personal, so there's a lot of stuff going on in a theater where people are, really getting into, say, this director's, life. And because these things are so personal, and naturalistic, that people are also like examining their own lives. Mm-hmm. This person's experience, how does this relate to me? All this stuff is going on in the theater, and then for the most part, the filmmaker then comes on stage, and so there's this real, quick intimacy that develops with an in-person festival, and that's why I love this world. So that will never be replaced. And, as much as people, say go online, and as much great content is out there online, that type of experience will never go away. Mm. It may be smaller, most likely will be, some people might just drop out, but what we're finding is, especially with the platforms that are now available, because we use this system Eventive. Mm-hmm. We were the second festival to use them for ticketing back in 2016. And they've since grown to do ticketing for all these festivals. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, in 2 weeks, they invented basically a virtual festival platform. Because it's engineered by this wonderkind who's actually from Memphis, if you didn't know.
I did not know that. Yeah, that's good info.
Theo Path is now, I think he was at Stanford, but I don't think he has time for Stanford because he's doing so much crazy stuff. Like he invented the top, virtual festival platform in 2 weeks, the best festival ticketing platform. And now it's doing all kinds of crazy stuff with Google and whatnot. So it's pretty amazing. So within the space of 2 weeks, when the pandemic hit, the best virtual platform was, invented, and we were already using it. So we started using it, and then, the big trick is distributors allowing new platforms, new streaming services to host their films on. And once they saw the theater shut down, there was nowhere to play their movies. So then they started working with us to show their stuff on our channels, so before they invented their own, before, let's say whatever, HBO Max got bigger for independent theaters, Kino Lorber, an independent distributor, they invented their own online streaming system, and now it's sort of everyone is doing it. But there was a period where festivals were the only people that could do it, and so all these people knew that we had, curated these audiences for this type of content, so they knew, well, if movies aren't in theaters and trailers aren't on social media, no one's going to know what to see of our movies because they don't put any money into advertising,
right?
Kind of like the big studios do. So we are sort of their advertisers. People come to us and say, "What's good?" And then when we say, "Well, go to our theater and check this movie out," and they go, "Okay, yeah, because you guys, film, you never let us down, so we're going to go see that movie."
Yeah.
So we started then hosting the best independent foreign films available, which those other streaming services weren't yet doing. Mm-hmm. So people were blowing through their Netflix queues and their Prime stuff, and
right.
They're like, "There's nothing else to watch." And then we come along and say, "Well, here's this new independent film that you would be seeing at the Tin Pan Theater, but now you can see it online." So it's actually like, it's so much easier to host events online and things like that, just because you don't have to have so many people and moving parts and pieces. So we just, because the system was so easy to use, we just kept using the virtual element. And when we first did an online festival in 2020, we got people from 40 countries and 45 states. And, so it was like, well, people know about us. We've always had people traveling in for the festival from, up to 30 states and stuff. About 25% of our audience was always travel. So, there's people that knew about us all over the country. And then, so the virtual fest was a way to, continue, engaging with that audience that couldn't make it again to another festival, even though they, maybe it's not COVID that's stopping them, but whatever else, they'll come when they can. And if they can't, all right, well, I'll just check it out on virtual because they do some cool stuff. So that's what I think we'll do for as long as it makes sense. As long as people are tuning in, we'll continue in this hybrid mode, because you got to have the in-person stuff because there's nothing like it.
Right.
And then you have the virtual for people who can't afford to come or wouldn't otherwise wouldn't be able to make it.
Right. I think virtual also scales, which is super important.
Mm-hmm.
What is the 72-hour filmmaker scramble?
Yeah,
and what is your role in the scramble?
Yeah, so we've been working with this great organization, Scale House. I think we've been doing this for about 5 years, where we'd meet in the summer, and I'd give a little shoestring budget filmmaking workshop. So just kind of using my philosophy of filmmaking in that, you go with the constraints first.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is what I was talking about before. Is well, what do you have? You say, well, you got to get this done in 3 days. You have no money, and you have a camera, and you have this team of 3 people. And here's an idea of a movie. So, at the end of this workshop, we'd say, okay, well, here's your clue. Now you got 3 days to make a movie. So submit this at Sunday at 6 p.m. or something.
Right.
And then we'd have this, awesome outdoor screening, during the summer to, and then do the whole festival treatment of Q&A to every team. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a blast. We have something similar, I guess, on the East Coast, a 48-hour film festival. It's kind of similar. The only thing with the 48 is that there are T's and C's, or terms and conditions, where you submit the film, but you have to write or call them for permission to use your film or monetize it, because
oh really?
Yeah, because I think they want to be cut in on the monetization.
Yeah,
they basically own the rights to your film. This is oversimplification, Todd, but I believe they own. I think they own the rights to your film if it runs through their festival. But I know one of the people who helped run it, great producer named Jennifer Bonnier, and from her, I think she says that they're really not very strict. Like at this point they have thousands and thousands and thousands of films. And so if you're one of the people who call and say, hey, can I have the rights to my film back? I think they work it out with you pretty easily without a lot of fighting.
Oh, that's nice at least.
But I don't think these filmmakers necessarily know that they don't own their film anymore once they submit it. Maybe they do. Somebody can hit me up, contact at bonsai.film or on Twitter. Let me know if I'm full of shit here or not. You talked about nothing's like being in person. I totally agree, because the networking goes deep instead of wide. What can festival attendees expect this year? In person, specifically.
Right. Well, so attendees, I think what we try to do every year is to just broaden the experience. And, to make it more immersive. Mm-hmm. So if you're coming for the fest, we're going to have so much going on, and you're going to be sort of transported to this world that's not necessarily here, like everyday life, So as soon as you get out of as soon as you get into a theater, there's going to be, a small band on stage.
Nice.
And it's going to be maybe background music as you talk about the last movie you play or what you're excited for, whatever, to people you just meet. So that's going to be going on. And then, you are going to be introduced to the filmmaker that's going to show their movie. And then you're going to have, this Q&A with them after you get to meet them. And then, as you go to the next one, you're going to see some kind of, let's just say some weird stuff going on outside. We did this a few years ago that I want to bring back. It's just like, there's some cool cats in town doing some, interesting, like circusy act type of stuff. So hopefully as you walk from one bed to the next, you're going to see something really weird, some kind of street theater or something. And, and then, as you sit down to like a meal at a place in between movies, you're going to run into someone who, is going to be thumbing through their thing. And then you're just going to, go up and talk to them. What'd you see? What'd you like? What should I see? So that sort of thing, just transforming the town into this, this little oasis of culture and a real engagement on what's going on in the world, as well as an escape. So that's what I, like when we talk about always like branding the festival, like whatever is going to be on screen is an engagement with what's going on in the world. Because like I said, independent film is it's typically really personal. These personal stories transform to something fictional, let's say, or a documentary for that instance of like what is really going on, and here's the real story. And it's real immediate, way more immediate than a studio can get something on the screen. Studios lag a couple years at least. Yep. So this thing happened 2 years ago. This was the mood. And now 2 years ago, we're going to have a movie about it. Whereas indie film, it shrinks down that timeline. And so there's going to be a really deep engagement about what's going on in the world, interpreted from all different perspectives and life experiences. We love to have a lot of diversity in the program so that if you go to the festival, you can experience, what's going on in the world from all these different angles. Whether it's men, women, racially, country of origin, that sort of thing, like that's the type of experience we want to create. So it's a deep engagement in what's going on in the world, but, it's also totally separate from how the world is. So you're immersed in this atmosphere where you're really engaged and it's fun, even if issues you're talking about are hard. And at this, it's different in that you're engaging with everything that's going on versus when you're out of a festival world and you're going about your daily life, like all this stuff's going on and you're doing your best not to really, engage with it in your head because you go nuts, thinking about all the crazy stuff going on out there. Mm-hmm. So you're sort of like, trying to escape it, but it's always kind of there and it's built in, you never really address it. Or here's you address it and you're, and it has this cathartic, result. There was a juror a couple years ago, Brandon Harris, who now runs his own production company. He used to work for Amazon, and he's great. And Brandon was, he got on stage to introduce an award, and he goes, man, it's great to be in Bend. This is awesome. And he's like, I'm here, and while I'm here, I kind of forgetting about how shitty the world outside is.
Oh, I love that.
And he put it in good perspective. Like, yes, it's like it's Bend and it's different than it's slower and more spread out and prettier than a lot of cities and stuff. But it's also that experience of being in that sort of bubble. And a great musician, Jeff Tweedy, once said, I think early on, where was it? Maybe it was in, I don't know, maybe a women's march protest, but he said, you should come into our bubble, because our bubble has people of all walks of life. And, like, it's not a bubble where any, point of view, it's a bubble where all point of views are welcome, so it kind of subverts that idea of bubble, whereas bubble is very, homogeneous.
Yeah.
Where that, the bubble I'm talking about is this bubble where everything is welcome and all experiences are represented, hopefully,
Yeah, for sure. And what a great endorsement of what the Bend Film Festival is by Brandon Harris. I want to hit you, Todd, with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
I think I got through my coffee, so hopefully I can rapidly answer them.
What are the two best pieces of advice you received so far in your career, and who did they come from?
Yeah, it's I think there's this one superintendent on a project I was working on when I was in construction, and he said, just have a goal. And I don't know if it struck with me because it's so obvious, and that's how I was always thinking, or that this was new to me, and that he's, just have a goal. He's like, I wanted to have a boat, so I set a goal for 2 years. I'm going to have a boat, and then he started putting the pieces together. And I thought that was, I think that story just still sticks with me. One conversation I had probably in like 2002, and then 20 years later, I'm remembering. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really good advice. Is just have a goal, and you figure everything else. You work backwards to achieve it.
Yep.
Have a goal. I want a boat. It's not like I'm going to have a yacht or whatever. I'm going to have a boat. Okay. Well, what do I have to have a boat? You start piecing it together. I have $2,000. Okay. I'm going to buy a hunk of junk. And now, since I set it up for 2 years, I'm going to figure out how to rehab it, in those 2 years.
For sure.
I think that was a really good piece of advice. And like the other thing, and I don't know if this was I guess I could say it, like, in the construction job, there was this boss I had at one point that I couldn't stand. And, he was brilliant and really good at his job. I get it. But man, I just didn't like him. But he said, be insanely curious. So here, like, I'm coming from this environmental background, and then I went into construction management just because someone gave me the job. And I wasn't doing anything else. And so I didn't know anything about construction. And, and they didn't care. They just wanted people with an engineering mindset. So this was part of the training. And he said, be insanely curious, ask questions, see what you're capable of, and that's something that that stuck with me too, is, I think where I applied it most is be insanely curious about what you're capable of. Mm-hmm. And I think I see that sort of advice applied in many ways. Being out here, I watch a lot of, outdoor adventure films and things like that. And it is like once you push yourself to a limit you didn't think you could get, like, that is amazing what it does for, like, self-confidence and all different capacities of life, like, I really was capable of doing that, and I didn't think I could. And then you just keep setting those goals higher and higher. But what can you do? Take it as far as you can go, and you'd be surprised at what you're capable of. Yeah. I think that was really that advice and mindset is really informative.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I have a similar piece of advice that it's like, have a goal and break it down. I'm always fascinated about how people will talk about things they want as if they don't exist physically in the same world that they're in. Like, I'd love to one day have a Bugatti. Well, first of all, maybe that's a vapid desire, but okay, you want a Bugatti.
Well, you got to define a Bugatti for me.
Right. Well,
what's a Bugatti?
That's a really expensive car, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, it's all good. And it's like, well, you talk about a Bugatti, like men and women didn't make it, like it physically doesn't exist. So how much does it cost? Okay. It costs that. Okay. Well, how much will that cost you per year? And if you wanted to really start today, like if you really wanted a Bugatti, what's the amount of money you would need to save or earn per day for X amount of time to go buy it? And that's all you have to do. It's that whole reverse engineering thing and really breaking the goal down. With those two pieces of good advice you got, if you had to give filmmakers one piece of advice based on your experience running this festival, what would that advice be?
Yeah, if you're a filmmaker or you're aspiring filmmaker, for me, it's kind of the same thing as think small, think about what you got. Think about, welcome the constraints. So, the film that actually, for me, actually wound up like doing something versus like, creatively helping me develop a voice and actually doing well as far as critically and audience wise, was this film Lefty. And that's a real exploration, let's say, of the neighborhood that I grew up in the mindset that we all had. And so that was, well, what do I have that's cool? I have these friends that are funny. So, most of the people in there weren't actors. They were just friends. And we have this unique sort of neighborhood. So that's what we got. All right, now how to craft a movie around that. And so at the festival, we developed this program called First Features. And this is something I'm fascinated by is, there's directors that come out and make these just mind-blowing first features. Like let's say Darren Aronofsky, makes Pie. So right, so like maybe he made that for $20,000, and what he said, I'm in New York. Maybe he had this, like engineering mindset of the whole Fibonacci secrets in Pie or something. I've never seen a movie explore this kind of stuff. So he's, like he did, and then that goes to Sundance, and the rest is history. There's so many stories like that, and what I love about it, and this came from, kind of both reading, Spike Lee he wrote this great book about making of Malcolm X, and John Sayles wrote this great book about the making of Madawan. And in it, they kind of talk about the trajectory of their careers, and each one, has this unique, this self-actualization, let's say, of what do I have and what's lacking out there, what's my world experience that I'm not seeing on the screen. And I think that's that's the best thing for any filmmaker is to really explore internally, what's going on. Because, both of those, let's just say, from filmmakers from, different life experiences did fill that gap of something that hadn't been out there. I think Spike's first movie, She Gotta Have It, right? Like there wasn't a movie like that beforehand, like exploring, Black characters in that capacity, right? By someone coming from a Black voice. And, so then obviously the movie's awesome. And then he blows up. And where John Sayles is the same thing, is like, well, this is, there's this big chill and, but this is kind of lacking as far as Hollywood, really exploring, in kind of the 60s in retrospect. And he comes out with this Secaucus 7. And, and then both filmmakers go on to be inspirations for legions of filmmakers that come after them.
Yeah.
But that's always the thing, is like, instead of thinking big and let your imagination go, well, think internally and, think about your life experience and what you're not seeing out there, and make a movie about that.
Yeah. I think about Harmony Korine making Kids.
Right.
And
yeah, totally.
Perfect timing with the zeitgeist. And, it's what all the film critics want to see, which is a feature film that plays like a documentary and that scares the hell out of you and all that stuff, and scares the heck out of society. And, So take what is happening in your world that you're not seeing out there in the arts world and make it.
And I would say that, that's story-wise as well as aesthetically,
Yeah.
Because that's one great thing that spiked it too, is, just the different, the vignettes and all this stuff that he was doing, that, he kind of took the art form itself and made a lot of changes, I'm not seeing this in the art form, as well as the story, as well as the characters, as well as the void.
Yeah.
And that's why so breaking down like that first feature, that's why that movie made it, because it really did introduce something that had been out there.
Yeah. A lot of innovation comes from this concept of integrative thinking, where you take two ideas that are established and then combine them.
Right.
So instead of copying and going like one to N and copying what already works, you're able to combine two new things and then grind. So you go from N to one instead, which is super, super interesting. Which creatives do you most admire, Todd, and want to emulate? And what do they do from a technical or skill standpoint that makes their work stand apart?
Wow. I hadn't really thought of this in a long time, to be honest with you. But, going back to sales, like, he's a guy also that, had that sort of Shane Carruth mindset that I appreciated, in that, he was always bootstrapping his movies, like he would make a bunch of money, write scripts, and then, roll the dice on, use all that money to do his own stuff that had more, socially impactful themes, and he would make movies, essentially that mattered, with the money that he would make for like making a Van, writing a Van Damme script, this popcorn stuff, and then he would use that money to do some good. And then that's what, like I was never really successful at doing it, but at least in the narrative realm. But something with some kind of social, I don't want to say message, but theme, at least, some exploration of something that is socially relevant. So he's one for sure. And then, as far as like aesthetically, the only thing, the other person that comes to mind is, Steve McQueen. And I got to be honest, like I haven't seen, his most recent work, but I was just so blown away by Hunger, that, it's something that'll stick with me forever. And it's as far as his just the efficiency of his storytelling and his images is something that'll stick with me forever. And he's one too who I think really focuses on that life experience. About people that had been, say, marginalized or whatever, whether it's people from the south of Ireland or the Black experience in Britain. It's just that's the first two that I think would just come to my head as people I think about often and work I would love to emulate.
Two good choices indeed. What are the biggest creative and business mistakes you see newcomers making?
I would say not being mission focused is a big area. Again, what do you really want to say? What are you really out to do? always keeping that in the forefront of any decision you have to make.
Right.
And this was I think it was like Coppola. I was reading something, and he was talking about making like the conversation. I said, well, what's a director's job? And he goes, well, you got to have this guide star so he goes, the conversation to me was all about secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever any department would come with me with a question, I would answer it. Well, what is this thing about, how does this relate to secrecy? So he's like, so they're doing the Hackman's wardrobe. They held up like a regular trench coat and a clear one, And it's just such a weird wardrobe choice. He's like, this dude's wearing those cheap raincoats the whole movie. But he's like, that's what the wardrobe did. And he said, boom, immediately I picked the clear one because he says that says something more about secrecy to me. Of this, I don't know, juxtaposition of being covered yet exposed.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, shit, and that does make the movie more interesting, right? So his mission, the theme, secrecy, guided everything, So it does help in that quick decision making of the things that you got to do. And I would say the other thing is not considering the how when you're considering a question. So a theme in this discussion has always been that reverse engineering.
Yes,
and that's a big thing. So as soon as someone comes to me with an idea, as part of this job, after the idea comes out of their after I hear the idea, I'm immediately thinking of how. Mm-hmm. and when and who, to break it down. Cause no idea is bad. It's just what's possible given everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
And, so first how does this meet the mission? And second, and how is it done given what we have?
Yeah. I love that. And I promised this audience we would talk about this at some point in the conversation. And I think it's been such a big part of your life and your mission. Speaking of being mission focused, I just wanted you to say a few words about it because I've done this kind of work as well, or something similar, and meant a lot to me to read about it as I spent the week in the world of Todd Looby. You've done a lot of mission work in Liberia, West Africa, Honduras, Central America. What is that experience? Or how has that experience impacted you as a person, as well as your film work?
Definitely both have been intertwined. I would say everyone's gotta go to the developing world. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most eye-opening things that you could possibly do. When we talked about that safety net before, privilege. This is the lesson that you learn most is for the vast majority of people in the world, there's absolutely no safety net. Mm-hmm. Watching, people, Honduras is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Yep.
It's always between Honduras and Bolivia. But, there's a lot of single women with 2 to 3 kids. Mm-hmm. And they're making $1 a day and they got young kids. And it's like, how do you do that? And they do it. And more so is the faith that they have is amazing. In the faith and positivity is so mind blowing. Amidst such scarcity. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that I think every American needs to see is literally, there's no safety net. If they can't get the money, people don't eat, and that's an experience for a lot of Americans, let's not, you got to be honest about that. But even in America, there is a shelter somewhere. There is some kind of lifeblood. Mm-hmm. As unattractive as it may be, or impossible even to take advantage of those things, as it often is. There's nothing in the developing world. There's no, government agency. There's no nonprofit. There's no shelter. There's no food banks, things like that. Very, very, and if there are, you got to get there somehow. And for a lot of people that I've, seen both in going to Liberia and Honduras, that's a long walk,
Mm-hmm.
And, like you even hear the stories in Africa of like, well, we go, we walk 2 hours every day for water. And it's nuts, and the water might have a lot of worms in it and stuff,
Yeah.
So it's crazy to even think about. So just water, water.
Basic.
Like,
your basic
need. It's so, it's like before I went to Honduras, I did some Habitat for Humanity trips in Guatemala, in El Salvador. And that, that's what I would encourage most people to do. Those experiences were so informing that I wanted to do a longer time overseas, with people. And, I think going back to, sort of the hope and the positivity that everyone has and the faith that they have in that things will work out is really the biggest lesson there that, frankly, I think people in the Western, more privileged world have more existential angst that is really more negative than lacking of any sort of physical comfort. It's really interesting. I mean, it just to see how people are so celebratory of life because they know how fragile it is.
You think you'll ever make a feature film out of your experiences?
I tried to make a documentary about some of the moms I met in Honduras. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot pieced together, but I think what I would really love to do is, we had this weird thing where, everyone had cell phones, obviously, but we had this thing where, we had a phone number that we gave everyone before we left. So please keep in touch. And then we went to the US and lost that number. Mm. So they can get us. And, I would love to, follow up on what happened. Because as soon as we left Honduras, there was a coup there and, things started getting crazier and, cartels started really getting into Honduras to fill that void when there was government still, instability. So, again, these people already starting from a really scarce place, how are they surviving there on their own? So I would love to try to reconnect. And then, so at some point we have, this footage from 2008 and 2009 and at some point going back to revisit to see what's going, how they're doing. That would be, I think, a really, that would be a good project to really see.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. That would be amazing. And there is a difference, when you go to Guatemala, you can give folks your Facebook page or whatever, because they have the internet, and they can have internet cafes and they can just look you up that way. But when you go to Honduras, which was the latest trip my family took, it's so poor there that they're not necessarily going to be able to find you on the internet. So it's a story that needs to be told in a really unique way, where it hits home and we understand that at least to some degree, our standard of living might come, at the detriment of some poor people elsewhere.
And that's totally another thing too, is the abundance here is definitely, it's not necessarily zero sum, but
it's like standard of living
over-resourced. It's yeah.
It's like we take a long straw and suck those resources out and bring them right. It's like a type of fracking.
To steal,
a milkshake.
To steal from Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
There Will Be Blood, which, by the way, I've always said is like the best one of the best entrepreneurial movies of all time. And nobody thinks of it that way. But the opening scene with this man in the dirt.
Yeah.
That's what it's like to have to build your own business from scratch. Yeah. And nobody knows that more than you, Todd. Todd, you've been awesome. This has been an incredible conversation. Can you anytime, can you let everybody know where they can find you on social media, on the internet, and maybe even see some of your work?
Yeah. So, and thank you for having me. It's, it was a really great conversation. Always a pleasure to kind of sit down and go over things. And I'm always got my head buried in the day to day. So it's really cathartic to sit back and talk about it at least a little bit. So I appreciate it. And hopefully I've said something that'll help someone at some point with something.
Absolutely.
I don't know. But, I'm on, I don't really check my Instagram much, but for social media, I do scroll on Facebook. They'll only post stuff about films we're showing. So, it's my name, Todd Looby, Bend, Oregon. My old film stuff, I haven't updated my website. So full disclosure, you're not going to see, it's the website that I built myself and taught myself how to do websites is still up, and it hasn't been updated in, 10 years, but it's, Obrigado Productions, and Obrigado is OBRIGADO productions.com. So you can see, stuff about Lefty, and one of the, my first real narrative, and or Be Good, which was the last narrative I did, going on 8 years ago now, but still readily available and still getting some royalties from it, which is nice too.
Yep.
That's another thing in filmmakers. You never know what's going to happen. Get a movie out there, put it online, and you could get some checks every month, which is always nice.
That's nice.
So that, and then of course, for the festival, I'm just Todd.Looby, LOOBY at benfilm.org, and submit your movies. We want to go over as many as we possibly can get to get the best of the bunch and put them up on screen.
Submissions are open now?
Yes, they'll be open till early June. Next deadline is April 11th, and the prices go up a little bit.
And so, what's the website for Bend Film?
benfilm.org.
benfilm.org. And then give me that email address one more time for submissions. Or your email that you just gave, I believe. Yeah,
my email, Todd, TODD .Looby, LOOBY at benfilm.org.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll end on this. You mentioned Donovan McNabb going to school with you, being a year behind you. Yeah. What's your favorite Donovan McNabb story? Do you have one from school?
He was such an interesting guy. I mean, everyone. I mean, he just kind of floated around, he had an aura. He's a character. He was always just so loose. And I just remember, some playoff games where he would, he would just be singing before the game, just so relaxed. And, that's kind of how he played. He could, he would just rise above everyone, and it was really cool. Cool to see, how far he got. And then, it was nice because I played DB, and it was always great to pick him off in practice, which probably only happened twice, but, at least you could say that.
Absolutely, man. Todd, this has been amazing, and I appreciate you ending that on that note. And let's stay in touch. And I'd love to be out in Bend in October.
Yeah, I would love to have you out here as well.
Absolutely.
So let's for sure be in touch.
Yes, sir. We're going to make it happen. Take care of yourself. And until next time, man, stay safe and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you, Chris. You too.
All right, man. Peace.
You've been listening to the Make It Podcast. To find out more information about this week's topics, including links to relevant blog posts, projects, and indie creatives, please visit our website at www.bonsai.film. If you haven't already, you can join our podcast community on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice by searching for Make It Bonsai Creative, and the show will pop right up. You now have the opportunity to support the production of this podcast. If you love Make It and are a true fan of what we're trying to accomplish in the indie film community, please visit www.bonsai.film and click Contribute. Contributions start at only $5 monthly. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Bonsai Creative and on Facebook by searching for Bonsai Creative. You can provide feedback to us via email at contact@bonsai.film, and you can follow me, Chris, on Twitter at Flaming Your Heart. That's FLAMEINURHEART. And of course, if you're looking to take a big step towards your filmmaking success, go to www.bonsai.film and click on Services to explore a variety of offerings from keynotes and panels to pitch readiness assessments and so much more. You have everything to gain. Until next time, be better, be creative, be engaged, and thank you for listening.